Joachim, who was there for the Mendelssohn Concerto, and he was deeply involved with the Bruch Concerto and, of course, the Brahms Concerto and others. But even he has not been involved with the number of concertos that you have. And I know people like Esa-Pekka Salonen. Well, tell us all of the composers that have written for you.
Well, this started first with John Adams. I met him when I was about 20. And I think he's pretty much what everyone would agree is a household, in the best sense of the word, of household 21st century name. So he had written a violin concerto in 1993, and I met him in 2000. So this piece was already written. And I was playing all kinds of Sibelius and Tchaikovsky and all of the great Beethoven. I wrote my own cadenza for the Beethoven, so I was already starting to steer in that direction. It has timpani in it. But I really realized that I wanted to, as you said, I wanted to break this mold and really be an artist that was not going to bow to only traditions. I was going to break traditions and keep some of the traditions that I love, but also going to do the unexpected and do the undiscovered and get into that territory and see where I went with it. I think I was very aware of how in tradition we follow what we consider to be great examples. And that is a good habit. And then sometimes the examples aren't quite as great and the sheep follow. In some ways, I think the really great and the imaginative people out there can think about what they want to follow. And this is something I think very important that we can distinguish between. And that's really a very personal choice. But if you think really for yourself, you end up making those choices. So I made some of those choices. I think they turned out pretty well. But sometimes you experiment, and I was willing to experiment. It just happened that I was very lucky also. And we can talk about luck, because luck is, you can never have enough of that.
Luck is part of it, but in my opinion, to a large degree, we make our own luck. And the astounding thing is that it's not that concertos haven't been written consistently in all these decades, but they're played once and that's it. They're never played again. And that's been one of the really remarkable parts of what you've accomplished here, because in many cases, these concertos you've performed all over the world with all the major orchestras, and you performed them many, many times.
I was very lucky in this sense because, say, John Adams is quite a very skilled conductor. So he would often go to all these different orchestras around the world, and I could join, and he would program around, say, his violin concerto. He would do a short work of his violin concerto and then Pines of Rome in the second half or something like this. Same with Oliver Knussen, one of my absolute heroes, who passed away 2 years ago. But he was a hero for me, and really an incredible musician and conductor and composer. He would often do the same thing, that he could conduct the great, the big orchestras, any size of it, any genre, any different period of music. And I would be lucky enough to collaborate with the composers that conduct. This is a very, very important skill, I would say, for a composer. If there are any composers out there listening, to start thinking about more conducting, or at least learning the techniques of conducting. Because if you have a bunch of musicians together you can then say, hey, I can deliver this piece and I can conduct you guys. We can make a concert.
Well, we all know that for a piece of music to work, you must believe in it. You must deliver it 100% with your delivery and your commitment to the music, and you do that. And part of that is that you memorize these incredibly arduous and difficult works, and some of them are very, very long. And but you do it by memory, and it's
amazing.
The norm these days when you play a contemporary concerto. All bets are off. You get to use the music, and everybody understands. Well, it's just too complicated, and so you're allowed to use the music. But I know that without any doubt, one can't play from their heart, from their soul. They can't deliver in the same way if they have music in front of them. It's an extra step that the mind has to go through, and it just takes something away for most people. I've seen very few people that can play as well with music in front of them. So I think that's
it's very rare. It's an amazing thing because it becomes extremely personal, how someone's brain actually works. The apprehension of playing without a score can actually clamp down on the creativity of some of the players, just depending. In my case, with the newer works, just to even be able to play at the full tempo or perform a piece, knowing it well enough to get through it start to finish, there's so much muscle memory that needs to have occurred. Even if the music is in front of you, there's a couple scores that I will use the music for, because the cues involved and the complexity involved is so immense that if I had one slip, it wouldn't be worth it. But those are pretty rare. Luca Francesconi's Duende, The Dark Notes, is a piece I played out with the LA Phil last year or 2 years ago. And it was a really, really fun experience for all, including the listeners. But I do have a score that I used for that, because there are sometimes 20 odd bars that I know something happens in the winds, something happens in the percussion, there's something that happens at the same time. There are at different moments I need to make sure I remember exactly not only my part, but what's happening in theirs. But then there are parts where when I'm playing all kinds of crazy stuff on my own, of course, those things are memorized. I'm not even looking at the score then. So it really is a very individual situation with using score or not, but it's true that most of the time I don't. And I think of it really in the same way as Beethoven Violin Concerto. You have to start with the full score, always with the full score. This is one of the traditions that I decided I would go away from. The piano reduction is very, very useful, but it is not a score, and it should not be used as a score. What should be used as a score is only the score itself. So you see exactly what the markings are. You see exactly every instruction of the composer. You see how the different voices are. You see how they're spaced. You see who has what solo when. You see in what range. You see so many keys and clues as to exactly what the composer wants. So I always, always, always start with the full score, no matter what. And then if we're lucky to have a piano reduction, great. Go with the pianist and practice it with the piano. But so I always start with that, and my part is only one part of the whole thing. No matter how soloistic it is, you don't really understand the solo part until you understand everything else that's going on at the same time. So this is a very, very big part of the memorization. If we're talking about the memorization aspects of things. It starts always with the biggest picture, the score, the instrumentation, the structure, the movements, how many are they, how many movements are there, and what happens in these movements, what are the shapes in each movement, what are the moods in each movement, what is the music asking of us, from the big picture down into then note by note by note by note. So if we know all of these different aspects of the score, then remembering all of those different aspects comes down to time. How much time do you have? Because that's the only thing that really will guarantee great study.
Has there been a concerto, one of these concertos, that when you played it with orchestra, you were completely shocked?
Well, there's always these crazy premieres that involve a lot of nerves and a lot of excitement and great festivity and relief afterwards. There's no doubt about that. Always great relief. But it's comes down to a number of different things, really. How much time did I have with the score? How much rehearsal time did we all have together? That's really important. How much rehearsal time did we have? How many times did I meet with the conductor to go over the score in advance? This is also a huge, important thing. The conductor is your co-pilot. So this is very important to have the plan mastered between the two of you. Without good communication between you and your co-pilot, there's not going to be a smooth flight. We want a smooth flight and as many senses as possible. So this is very, very important. One of the things that I do that I think has worked very well is when, say, I have a performance of any new work, I schedule a conductor meeting either on FaceTime or on the phone a good 3 weeks in advance, knowing very well that if the conductor hasn't yet looked at the score as much as I have, which is pretty much always the case because I know these pieces so well, it forces them to then study earlier as opposed to the day before or a week before. I'm on it 3 weeks or a month before. And this is great because oftentimes I say, look out for this section, look out for that section. Things tend to come apart between X bar and X bar. It's happened time and time again. So we have to be absolutely locked in. And there are times like that in the great new pieces where if I miss a beat or I'm not looking at the stick if I get too consumed, and this is where memorization is so important. If I get too consumed in my own inner world without keeping my feelers out, I can miss a beat of the stick and then I'm off. And so it's like the stick, the playing, all of this has to be extremely, extremely coordinated. This is not like set 18th and 19th century music in this sense. So the precision level of that kind of ensemble, this is something that is really unique to 21st century music. So there is a certain nail-biting aspect to that, which I really enjoy. So the premieres are great because it's sort of like this birth of a work. You never quite know exactly what's ever going to happen in a concert. I'm sure we would all agree with that, but there's the extra suspense. And there's the extra kind of celebration factor of a piece that has never been heard before and is heard now for the very first time. The audience is present. The audience is part of this celebration. This is something that's very, very important for us to celebrate the start of a new work. So hopefully we've all prepared as much as possible. There was one premiere I did of John Adams' Scheherazade Point 2. This is his 50-minute symphony for solo violin and orchestra. He calls it a symphony, like Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. But the violin has almost a narrative character role, which is really interesting. And it's such a big, intense, and difficult piece that I think is extremely, extremely powerful. But in all of our rehearsals, and even in the dress rehearsal, we didn't even get through the whole piece start to finish. This is the New York Philharmonic and Alan Gilbert and myself doing this world premiere at David Geffen Hall. So it was a very, very nail-biting experience, but there was great relief afterwards, I can tell you. It went well. But this is the kind of thing that happens when people are experiencing a new work and there's X amount of minutes to a rehearsal, and that rehearsal break is going to happen at that time, no matter what notes we're playing when. So you have to be ready for anything, really, is sort of, and you really helped me prepare for that, I must say. You just never quite know what's going to happen.
Well, thank you for that. Tell us about the search for the style of each of these pieces. Now, the world has gotten smaller, but in the olden times, 1800s, oftentimes composers would use folk tunes from their country. It was much more nationalistic and much smaller. The world was a much bigger place. Do you find that individuality with the different concertos, or is it are they more similar than concertos of the past?
That's a great question. I would say that it really is something that's hard to generalize, because these creators are so brilliant. In a sense, it really comes down to their own unique lives. In the sense of John Adams, he is extremely American. He was born in America. He grew up in Concord, New Hampshire. He was very trained in the sense his dad was a jazz musician. His mother was an actress. He went to Harvard. Then he left Harvard before he even got his degree. He went to California. So he's very American. I think it shows up in his writing. Luca Francesconi has an absolutely wild imagination. Is it Italian? I mean, of course it is, but all of these guys have wild imaginations. There's no doubt about that, and that's what they all have in common. Esa-Pekka Salonen, you can definitely hear there are Nordic roots there. You can hear Sibelius, but then again, John Adams, his favorite composer, he would say, is probably Sibelius. So you really can't generalize, except that you can say that I don't think that these composers listen very much to other composers for ideas. I think they love listening to other compositions, but I think they're incredibly, they're very strong personalities and very large egos. They want to be their own sort of groundbreaking material. They're mavericks. They're rebels to a certain extent, and they want to stir it up their own way. And I love being part of that. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. They need a strong character to deliver these incredibly strong gestures, because that's what really it comes down to in all music. I think the traditions in some ways have maybe softened some of the gestures that these composers meant to deliver. Depending on what we get used to, which can be good, but it also maybe doesn't make us think really with our own minds as much as we should. And when I have a new score in front of me, I'm forced to think only for myself. I don't have a recording to listen to. Sometimes I have a MIDI if they make one for me, and that's electronic MIDI notes, basically, but most of the time they don't do that. I've had a few circumstances where that's happened, but it sounds like a computer. Oftentimes I'm just gotten a big score in the mail and I have to start from scratch. And that's can feel very overwhelming, and it should feel overwhelming because you know how much there is to learn. And that's part of the thing is you never stop learning. One should never stop.
You know, all of these concertos, we kind of don't think of this, but at one time they were new and they had to be interpreted. And whether it was the Mendelssohn Concerto or the Bruch Concerto or the Brahms Concerto, people were baffled. Well, how do I approach this? What do I do with this? And now all this time has passed and there becomes a tradition of how to play these things. What's good taste? What's bad taste? What's acceptable? And it kind of grows narrow.
And the worst one of all is what's violinistic. To me, that's the worst one of all. Because, well, I can ask you this question. I mean, violinistic, if someone asked you, what's violinistic? What would you say and what would I say?
Well, we might say different things because I'm less involved with this type of music than you are. But clearly, sometimes in the past there were violinist composers, and they understood the violin very, very well. But not to say that it was easy. And you know, we're talking about Paganini and Vignazzi. They wrote very, very difficult things. So, but they were playable. They were playable, and I think the great composers were very concerned about that. The non-violinists, like Brahms, where he brought in Joachim to just make sure that he stayed within the boundaries. He wasn't concerned about it being difficult because the greatest violinists would perform it. But there's difficult, and then there's unnecessary. So sometimes, if possible, like Joachim and the Brahms score, the different pencils. There was the pencil color for the conductor. There was a pencil for Brahms. There was a pencil for Joachim. So you can see very clearly, and there was someone else too that was involved, and you can see very clearly what Joachim did. And I think he was really he was a composer also as well as a violinist. So, but some of the places, Brahms, he just untangled some of the passage work, which would have been nightmarish and kind of unnecessary. And without harming the music, he just kind of rearranged a few notes and made it violinistic.
I mean, I think that's an awesome answer. I mean, the term violinistic in my head has to do with comfort levels. And it can be wisely used, and then it can be sort of abused in the sense that, oh, this is violinistic because it's comfortable. And one of the things that I've really mentally worked on myself is comfort is not necessarily the greatest thing ever in the world. In fact, it's not good. Most of the time we are not comfortable in any stage of life doing any specific thing at all. It's very hard to do something that's very difficult well and feel comfortable. So let's just erase that word right now, comfortable. Let's get rid of that. Relaxed. Let's get rid of these words. It's a question of expectation. Is this a comfortable thing? Is this a comfortable fingering? I just don't understand that. In fact, the only thing that I can say for certain is pain is bad and uncomfortable is okay. And we all have to kind of distinguish between when is uncomfortable become, as you're saying, unnecessary or painful. Now, sometimes composers intentionally write something that is meant to be uncomfortable and meant to press through that zone where it is literally, intentionally, almost unplayable. Solomon would agree with that, and he and I sort of agreed when he was writing this piece that this was going to be over the top. This was going to be about extremes. So, for example, the first 30 seconds of that piece start with me or any violinist alone doing the most ridiculously difficult finger entanglement passage that's meant to sound absolutely still, seamless, and it's basically separate 16th notes at quarter equals 144. So it's supposed to be seamless, still, like Terminator 2, the Metal Man, when Schwarzenegger blows him up and he breaks up into a trillion pieces. And then all of a sudden those pieces start to magnetize together again, and they start to form that body of the police officer, and he grows up and he starts running like 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour on his feet like this. And it's smooth as butter. And that's what this opening of this piece has to feel like and sound like. So it's really hard, and it's not comfortable, and it's almost unplayable, I felt at times, honestly, when I'm in the dressing room trying to get ready for this, and my warm-up is not going particularly well, and I feel like maybe this is just too damn hard. I signed up for this. What can I say? But there are people that would have changed it, but I thought that's actually not what this is about. This is not about having a comfortable start. This is about jumping right into the fire from the first moment. So I can I can think and rethink, but the thing's published and it's out there for all you guys to start learning, and it's a great piece of music. I don't mean to make it sound like it's so crazy that no one can play it, because you can. But it's just not about any sort of comfort versus uncomfortable. It is what it is, and it has a very strong gesture to it. So I think we will benefit musically, technically, mentally, and physically if we, in a way, stop assessing how comfortable is this and just say, I will be uncomfortable no matter what. I am uncomfortable. I accept that. I will now practice this passage.
Wow.
And sometimes it will work, and sometimes it won't work so well. I have a friend who's a player too, and I said, God, I nailed it this one time. I worked so hard on this thing. I got it. He's like, at least you got it once. It's like a big joke, but the thing is that it's the process of aiming, and when you find that your hard work actually has paid off, to me, that's the most satisfying part of all of this. Doesn't matter what piece, from which genre of music, when your hard work pays off, when you get past that kind of moment of assessing how you're feeling and what needs to happen, and you just do what you need to do. There's a certain amount of overthinking that we can all indulge in a certain way that's not necessary. We just do it.
Well, since we're talking about technique, your thoughts on the challenges. Every concerto has challenges, and to do it well, there is nothing really easy when it comes down to it. But let's talk about traditional violin technique and classical technique that we're used to playing, Lalo Symphony Espanol and the Sibelius Concerto and so forth. Do you stick to the traditions that have come from the past. That is, intonation must be as near flawless as possible, and a tonal production of beauty and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, first of all, the intonation, the world of intonation is a whole world unto itself. And I feel that intonation is really dependent on you as the player and listener knowing what the center of the pitch actually does sound like. If one doesn't know what the center of the pitch sounds like, it's very hard to play in tune. So the other thing is vibrato is the greatest camouflage for bad intonation ever in the world. And actually, vibrato is something that I think, if not used intentionally, kind of actually creates bad intonation just because it's sort of hit or miss. So often I just practice with no vibrato, whole long passages, and you find out how reflexive it is as a just as a kind of twitch reflex. You want to use vibrato, just leave it out. Sometimes I have given the occasional class where I just say, okay, just that exact same thing, that phrase, as musically as you can, with the utmost feeling and zero vibrato. And it usually takes 3 or 4 or 5 times for that to actually happen. It's amazing. So vibrato is very much overused and reflexively used without intention. So if we get rid of that, all of a sudden we hear how, and I often hear how badly my intonation is when I take away my vibrato. So that is a very important technique that I use to get my intonation really on point. Then, once you got that down, then you can start to add those waves in there, because that's what they are. But so that's a big way I practice intonation. Then another way I practice for intonation is slowly, proportionately, in the same way as I would quickly, if that makes sense. So that means if I'm at full tempo, I take the same amounts of time, but just all slowed down. Does this make sense? So,
yeah.
So that the slow parts are actually slower, the fast parts are slower as well in proportion. So this actually helps me to be musical and not lose my sense of what I'm doing with the music, even though I'm practicing. So
one thing I would like to add, and you can comment on this, but I think you'll probably agree with me, and this concept of practicing without vibrato part of the time, and depending on who you are, but during that time that you're practicing without vibrato, but playing with a great sound at the same time.
Definitely, it's all about sound. And it's all about, at that point then, you're not using the left hand as a mechanism to make great sound other than great pitch, if you see what I'm saying. Then, all of a sudden, you're relying on the right hand, which is really making the sound. Where is your bow? How are you using the hair? How much even rosin is on the bow or not? How do you want the sound to be? Which is a really important question. Just not one great, big, beautiful sound, or not. It's many different colors that the bow produces without vibrato. And this is really ignored, I think. This is something that is a whole universe of tonal production unto itself. Now, oftentimes I think we get used to playing Tchaikovsky violin concerto. We got to project to the last row, yeah. And that's what we aim for, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how? How do we do that? And if we get rid of the left hand vibrato aspect, then all of a sudden we were able to focus all our attention on tone production. And I think in general, the left hand has so many challenges just to play the violin well, that the right hand, the function of the arm and the sound production kind of does suffer often. So we have to understand and give the right hand, the right arm, the right whole system of the body, in a sense, the attention that it deserves. How does one produce a great sound? How is it done? We're all different in terms of how we're built, and it's as individualistic as, you know, our faces or our thumbprint or whatever we do. But how do we individuals get our best sound? That's something that requires self-knowledge and, at a certain degree, experimentation. I found that it all starts from my feet. If I don't have a good way to grip the ground, then how on earth can I have the power that I need to send that sound out there? Or just to feel that I'm producing something from inside that has to come out in a very expressive way. It all starts from the center of your body and down. So this is something that I think a lot about, the physicality aspects of violin playing. If you're teetering on 6-inch heels, I doubt you will be able to feel the balance and stability that is needed. So, you know, some players actually play without shoes. There's one colleague of mine, Patricia Kopachinskaya, she plays with no shoes. And that's kind of a funny thing, but in any case, that's her. But you have to find a sense of stability, is basically what I'm trying to say. And that's at the start of a great sound production.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That's hardly ever talked about. But balance and the way you stand, there is absolutely no question that to some degree, in some cases a lot, the way you stand, balance, not standing on one foot off balance in the most difficult passage in the concerto, and you're standing on one foot and you don't have good balance. Again, that short circuits the mind. The mind is instead of being able to function 100% on the music, part of the mind is drawn away in standing up. How am I going to stand up? And
it's like Perlman say, he had found a great way to utilize his body to produce a great sound. That's an example of someone who knows so well, probably better than all of us, how to produce a great sound. So it's self-knowledge as much as it is about standing, or it's how do you use what you've been given? How do you use it? It's a tool.
Well, you've always had great balance. That was something that you had right from the beginning. And also your comments about vibrato. Yes, vibrato, the great masker of sound, and you can make up a lot with vibrato, but you also take away a lot, because instead of making sound and using sound production in the most healthy way and then letting the vibrato be this very individual and expressive beauty that is so wonderful, it becomes kind of a caretaker of all the blemishes in your playing.
It's amazing how hard playing violin is without vibrato. It never ceases to amaze me how hard it is. And this is something that I think there are some schools that thought that continuous vibrato is a really great thing. It can be, but also continuous non-vibrato is also a great challenge.
Well, it's kind of a lost art, but I like to go back and listen to some of the recordings of Eugene Izai, because he was kind of a crossover artist from the 1800s into the 1900s, and his vibrato is definitely not what we would call a modern, fully developed vibrato. But he oftentimes, it seems like it's a lost art, because he's able to play a phrase with no vibrato, and it's just drop dead gorgeous. It's really beautiful. And then he'll on the repeat, he'll use this vibrato that was used probably in the 1800s.
In the 21st century repertoire, all of these sort of 19th century traditions of vibrato use are sort of blown away. There'll be times where it says really absolutely no vibrato, or tons of vibrato, start going ring, 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 like intentionally, or just completely flat. So you're given these specific instructions that are really very, very specific. And that means that you got to wipe all that slate completely clean in terms of what you're used to doing. This is not helpful in my case when I'm looking at all of these new instructions and new sound worlds. When you have a whole new sound world, in some ways you have to pretend at that moment, you're pretending that this is the only sound world I know, this one. And this is the world I live in. So you have to kind of get rid of what you used to know. But of course, it's part of who you are, so you do retain it. But it just becomes more interesting, I think, to hear these different universes and be able to actively switch and change between them, if that makes sense. So
that does make sense. And I'm got my eye on the clock here just a little bit, and I don't want to run out of time because we have some other things to talk about and questions. But I do want to say that I think you have really single-handedly inspired a whole new generation of violinists that are coming up. And you may not fully realize that, but I'm in a position that I can taste the wind, feel the wind, and also the attitudes of young violinists, which have suddenly and dramatically changed. And they're very interested in these new compositions, and they're very keen for the first time to delve into this type of thing. And I think it can really be, you could really take the credit for that, because you're the one that's doing this. And
that's
I also
kind of you and generous of you to say, but I just love this stuff, and that's kind of at the bottom of it all. That to me, this stuff is hip. If you listen to Stockhausen, it's hip. If you listen to Boulez, some of those sounds are just super cool. No two ways about it. But that's sort of the standpoint that I come from. It's totally non-intellectual, I must say. It's just totally like, oh, that was a really amazing moment that I've never heard before. And it can be really quite that simple. But you're sweet to say. I just think it's cool, and if that's translating to people, that's great. I mean...
Well, and I think as I started all of this, that is the normal way of the past, hundreds of years of playing newly written music, and it's only our time where that has not been the case. So...
but you know, the interesting thing about this is that I had a very, very, very strong base before I even started all of this stuff. And it's really important, it's just to know your history, I would say, that the principles of violin technique are the same to me. Whether you're playing Bach, whether you're playing Tchaikovsky, whether you're playing Solonin, Francesconi, or Thomas Addis, it's the same. It's in
well,
tune.
and
if they're quarter tones, those quarter tones have got to be in tune also. There's no such thing as like out-of-tune okayness in 20th century music either. So all that stuff is the same. Either you studied really in depth or not, it's not any different.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with all of that more. And I would also say that is the reason that all of these composers have come to you, because you are the one that will learn their music, prepare it with the tradition that's required. That is great pitch, great sound, and emotional content, musicality. You're willing to do that and then bring it across the finish line in a way that is well received, that audiences like. And that's proven in the fact that when you perform these contemporary pieces, the house is packed. People come to hear it. And so these composers are thrilled, both in your delivery, that it's honest, that it's true, that you're not faking. People don't know this music. So, a person could go out on the stage and fake away and not get away with it exactly, but who knows, And
the thing is, that is all totally 100% true, of course. But the thing is that you have, as a performer, no matter what music you're playing, you have to show everyone how this goes, is the bottom line of it. I have to explain in the ways that I can in my craft what is happening. It has to be extremely clear, whatever it is that you are saying. What are you saying is what we must all figure out as musicians. What are we actually saying? It sounds so rudimentary, but what are we doing? What are we saying? What's the gesture? What's the point? What is happening? This is what we need to be so clear in when we perform, whether it's Lalo or something else. What is happening? So when we know what's happening, then we can take it up there to the nth degree and make it a powerful statement. And the other thing is that this should be exciting. All this should be very exciting and interesting. And that's the way I approach this, that this is an event. This should be celebrated and fun and interesting and an experience. And that's the way I approach the performances. And that's something that I try to convey, that this is excitement generating material. And whether you're playing anything, I would have the same kind of feeling about presenting it. So it really is all about presentation in the end, preparation for presentation.
And I remember when you did the Scheherazade with the New York Philharmonic, and I started getting phone calls in the dress rehearsal. There's something extraordinary going on here. And I got calls from some of my former students. And
something extraordinary stressful is going on here.
So, and I've never gotten calls like that before. But maybe we can open up this to questions now. And we've neglected a little bit about your earlier career, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about that if we have a few minutes. But Danielle, if you want to open it up to questions at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was not something planned, but Leila, with your blessing, I would love to share in the chat a link to the YouTube of the Concertgebouw concert with the John Adams.
Oh, is that on you? I didn't even know that. That's cool.
Is that okay? Okay.
Sure. I can't listen to myself. I run away as fast as possible.
We won't play it right now, but what I want everyone...
It's like I'm so picky. When I hear myself, I start kind of assessing and thinking what could have been better, or what was good, what was like less good, and it makes me nuts. And the way my 20-year-old teases me, he starts putting on recordings, and it's like I'm an insect being shot with repellent. I'm out of there. I am so out of there.
Well, I've put it in the chat, and what I'd like everybody to do is when this conversation is over, You can click on it now, but don't watch it now, obviously. Just pull it up in a separate window and then...
You can watch it, I just don't want to hear it.
No, I know, but they need to listen to the questions and answers.
This is the thing. I mean, the playing happens in the moment for all of us. And we do the best we can in that moment. And then that moment is over. Then it's on to the next moment. So the recordings are capturing that moment. But we're already in the next one, If I could maybe jumpstart a question here from myself. I love what you talked about in terms of technique, in terms of the non-vibrato practice. I totally believe in that as well. And it's so refreshing to hear that an artist of your level believes so strongly in that way of working.
Oh, that's good.
With all the music making and everything. And because you can't vibrate something that's out of tune. Otherwise...
Well, the best way to hide, I can tell you the best way to hide an attitude note, just start with a vibrato on it.
Yeah, but someone with a good ear.
Attitude, start vibrating as fast.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to fool anybody that you care about listening. But
but I'm saying that this is a human instinct.
Yes.
Craving mechanism.
Yep. Well, that's why you hear scales sometimes with one note, non-vibrato, then they get to their third finger, ding, and then 4, 1.
I'm just saying that, myself included, there's an instinct to fix. And this is a very easy way to fix. Now, if you're used to that, it becomes habitual. And that's what we want to work against, bad habits. So I'm not telling anyone that you're going to fool anyone, because you're not. But now that we've made that clear.
My other technical question is about, you talked about balance and about feeling rooted to the ground. And I'm curious if you could talk for a moment about, it looks like you're using a center chin rest. And about that.
It's a really cool story, because I came in when I was 8 years old to play for Mr. Lipsett there, and one of the first things he did was take away my shoulder rest. And he said, maybe you don't need this, let's try without. And so I did. And that was the end of my shoulder rest. I think that it's not the best for everyone. I would never be presuming to say that everyone should just throw their shoulder rests away. But I think that it's important to assess what it is that you're doing, basically. So I often get a stiff neck. I'm not going to lie about that. But you have to be very aware of how you're standing, how you're utilizing your body to produce sound. Is your right shoulder creeping up or not? Are you utilizing your elbow to lead your hand? Because I do. And I think that's a very huge part of my tone production, that it's not pressing, it's pulling. So you're pulling up, and then you're pulling down. You're pulling up, and you're pulling down. So you use sort of the weight plus energy to produce sound. In my case, this is just how it's worked for me. But for everyone to think about, what are they doing in terms of that? But often simple posture fixes will actually improve your sound tenfold in a period of about 10 seconds. If I say, lower your shoulders, lean a little bit less forward and more back, actually relax rather than press, and utilize the weight of your upper body, chances are that already increases your sound, actually more than the effort of trying to produce in another kind of way.
So that was.
I hope you have that recorded.
I do. Do we have anybody that would like to come, any students here that would like to come off mute and ask
No one be shy.
It's a question. We do actually have a question from the audience, which I think is interesting. Again, kind of piggybacking on the slow practice. Do you ever practice an emotional phrase without emotion in a technical way? And if so, how do you know when to add the emotion?
That's an awesome question. So ask the question again so I make sure I fully...
So, yeah, do you ever practice an emotional phrase without emotion, like in a technical way? And if so, how do you know when to add the emotion?
Well, everything's emotional to me, for starts. It's just what emotion. So what is the gesture of the music? What is the mood of the music? Is it intentionally boring? Because that actually becomes very exciting. To play something intentionally going nowhere, all of a sudden is very interesting. So defining what is emotional, this is a whole different sort of concept of, is emotional passionate? Is emotional actually very cool? Is emotional something undefinable? Is emotional something fortissimo or pianissimo? Or is it something that captures descriptive words that almost kind of conflict? I mean, this is the great power of music. Emotions are not able to be described often in words, they're just felt. And music can really make these feelings clear without putting them into cut and dry sort of categories. Now, of course, to be most free, you have to feel in control. At least I do. So I have to practice in a way that makes me feel like I'm in control. So when my hands are sweaty and I got not enough sleep and I got bow hairs all over the place and, you know, et cetera, all those hours of practice that you hopefully did in different ways. So if you have a problem with intonation, you would practice without vibrato. You would understand in your mind what each note, the center, sounds like. If you have trouble with intonation, first step is listening. If you're not listening well, you will never have good intonation. So listening, what does that mean to listen well? What does it mean to hear something, separate it from the physicality? And this is something very hard to do, I think, with playing an instrument well, whether it's piano, violin, or anything, is separate the physicality, the feelings, the sensations of the physical aspect of the playing from what you're actually hearing and what you're actually listening to. These are very, very difficult things to do. So it's almost like you got to turn off one part of the brain and just listen without feeling your body. You have to listen. And then you kind of combine these things together when you're like, okay, when my hand does this, it's in tune, it sounds right. Okay, I got to remember that physical sensation. So these things are all linked, but when you're in control of your skills, then all of a sudden what you've practiced you can utilize to get the gesture across the way you really want to get it across. But it does take a lot of intentional listening. Intentional listening is number one, I would say. Does that answer the question correctly?
I think it does philosophically, but I would love to step in as a violin teacher to answer that question, Danielle. Is that okay?
Of course.
That way of practicing technique with no music, other than the very most basic, if you're trying to go slowly and develop your pitch or something like that. But I think it's a mistake in general to practice technique without the music, because frankly they're one and the same. The technique and music are the same thing. So if you're not doing something technically right, you're not doing something musically right. And I think it's basically a waste of time, except for if you have some basic technical issue that where you have to focus just on that alone. But if you're practicing something, in my opinion, the music should be always combined with the technique, or nearly always.
If you have something that you're working towards with the emotional aspect of it, of course, as we just heard, completely physically connected. So those things have to be joined. Absolutely.
Good. How are we doing on time, Danielle?
We are great. Do any students have a question? Macy?
Yeah, so thank you so much to both of you for your time, first of all. And so I was wondering how, or if you've had to deal with people who, well, since you are not, always playing the traditional concertos and traditional repertoire, I'm sure there are people who are like, oh, I don't really like that, or I don't want to, I would prefer you to play Tchaikovsky or something. And so I'm just wondering how you've dealt with that. And I'm sure probably it was more at the beginning, and now,
I still get a lot of requests for Mozart 3. So it hasn't gone away, in a sense. There will always... Sorry?
I would just say that would be an interesting question that I would dovetail onto what this young lady asked. And is it important for you to play the traditional repertoire to keep your musical chops and your violinistic chops where you want them, your sound where you want it, or does it matter?
Well, I mean, first of all, I made the conscious choice to almost move away from the traditional repertoire. That was a conscious choice on my side. But it was after I had done already many years of performing that repertoire. So I would say that one cannot make that choice until they have done that. And this was part of my evolution, in a sense, my individualistic evolution. Everyone has a different path, in a sense. But this stuff is so hard. It's all hard in different ways. There is never a piece that I find easy in any department. So look what's on my desk. Bach. This is just as hard, if not harder to me than Esa-Pekka Salonen. But I also play less Bach than Salonen. Now, someone else who plays more Bach would say maybe they find Salonen more challenging. It comes down to what you are more used to. And if you can shake up, keep things in rotation, this is, I think, what will make you overall a really, really strong player, is not get, again, that word comfortable, don't get comfy in that you end up just doing things that feel more comfortable for you. You have to always step outside that comfort zone. So in my case, I can't make everyone happy. The only person really that I want to make happy is myself and the audience. If the audience is there and it speaks to them, I'm really glad. But I also knew myself, honestly speaking, that playing only the standard repertoire for my entire career as a violinist was not going to make me happy. That was my personal choice. And maybe someone else is different than me. So really it's about listening to what is going to make each of you individually happy as musicians. But you have to start with the adequate and the right, more than adequate, obviously, but you have to start with the right steps to get you on the path that you want to get.
Yeah, and I would say that the question that was asked is somewhat self-answered because of your success I don't care who you are, whether you're Itzhak Perlman or Heifetz, not everyone will like you. Some people just won't. But if nobody likes you, then you don't have a career, that's for sure. But clearly, it's very obvious that a lot of people do like you, and it's very clear that the right people like you because you have this astonishing career that continues on and on.
It's really important to say something strongly. I think this is very important. Whatever music that you're playing, you have to say it strongly. And I think people appreciate, as we were saying, talking about really a very strong presentation, a very clear gesture. People like clarity. And this is very, very important. So whether you're playing a piece of new music or Sibelius, a great, strong performance will always be appreciated, I think.
I could not agree more. And I know we must be running out of time here. I would just like to, the history of Leila Josefowitz, you can see some of that on TV, on YouTube, and some of the things that would explain why she has the career that she has now and why she can technically do the things that she does. If you look at her when she was 12 years old, playing the Vieuxtemps 5 with the Los Angeles Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl, or her Boston Pops performance of La Campanella with John Williams, and things like that. There's many, many things on there, very young things. And in those days, and I don't even know whether you realize this or not, Leila, but in those days, there's this kind of pendulum that swings back and forth. And in that time, you literally had to have built your career by the time you were 13, 14, 15 years old. You had to already make it as a solo artist if you were going to make it. And I don't think that was a healthy time, but that's when Midori came up, Hilary Hahn came up, you came up, Joshua Bell was a bit older, but that's what it took in that time. And thankfully, I think we don't have that time now. You can be older.
I would say it really is true. It's different now.
Yeah, and so I think it's actually healthier now. But you were ready for it, and you did it. And but anyway, I suggest some of those performances for anyone who's curious about Leila's development.
But it also explains, too, why I made the personal choices later that I did, in a sense. Because I had to start so young with the things that I did do that you can see, that I wanted to, it's almost like two separate careers. Like, all of a sudden now, boom, I'm going to go in a completely different direction. This is one of the reasons, for sure.
Yeah, and you certainly performed all the masterpieces. You know all of the masterpieces and soloed with them with orchestra. And
I have to admit something though, like I played Beethoven so many times, and I know who I am as a person, and some pieces definitely suit certain personalities better than others. There's no doubt about it. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but there's a certain quality to Stravinsky because you feel his personality, which is so strong in Stravinsky. You feel Vivaldi's personality. Then you have the player's personality that either is like the perfect match. We're used to melding ourselves so much to what we're playing, but then there's an undeniable mesh of certain personality with certain composer that works especially well, or certain personality with certain musical aesthetic that works especially well. And I think I did tap into that that was helpful to figure out. So it's an interesting concept, right? As players.
Well, and
Really
I
used
think,
to.
yeah, and I think as an artist, you learn that about yourself, what matches, and most of the great artists have not played everything. They recognize there's some things that just doesn't work as well for them. Danielle, I know we're over time, so I'm going to let you take over at this point.
Well, I just have to thank both of you. I mean, I saw this talk a few weeks ago as part of the Sounding Point Academy, and this talk this evening was a lot of similar concepts, but a lot of new information. And I'm sure that if we had another conversation, you'd unpack a whole another hour of incredible stuff. I would like to spend an hour and just hear Leila and Mr. Lipsett talk about fourth finger.
Oh, we didn't even get to that.
We didn't even get to the fourth finger. And
well, I'm happy to talk about fourth finger another time.
I would love to hear it. I would love to hear it. Well, you've got a good one that we all know for sure, and you can see it even in the first few bars of the Adams. And I know that Mr. Lipsett certainly believes in the power of the fourth finger.
Fourth finger.
But more importantly, large concept. Building the kind of strength and organization and balance in our bodies from a young age, so that we can go on and have careers. And I don't think everybody can have everything in their career the way that you have, Leila, but you sure inspire us all to try. And so thank you for that.
Well, that's so sweet.
From the heart.
Thank you, Leila.
Time.
Thank you,
all. Mr. Lipsett.
Yes, how about a round of applause for both of them? And of course, we have cellists here at Center Stage Strings as well. And I know all of you are brilliant enough to see how every single thing that was spoken about applies to cello as well.
Absolutely.
Except maybe the shoulder rest and the chin rest. But other than that, I think everything else, maybe even the fourth finger applies. Horacio, does the fourth finger apply to cellists as well? I think so. It must.
Definitely.
Okay, well, with that, thank you so much. And we will see all of you. Tomorrow will be joint violin technique class in my Zoom, and cello technique back to its normal location. So I'll see you all then. Thank you. Have a great night.
You guys. Thanks a lot.
And stay after for a moment here.
Okay.
Leila and Mr. Lipsett, yeah.
The recording has stopped.
She didn't send the link.
Send the link for what? She will send the CSS
Yeah.
community. Of course.
I thought she said she was going to do it now.
Well, she didn't. Don't worry, she'll send it. Besides, we can go on YouTube ourselves and find it.
That's exactly what I'm doing here.
It's not.
American Canadian. I didn't know she was Canadian.
Hi.
How'd you like that? Do you like my question? Oh, yeah.
Did you know that was Dad's question? How?
How? Oh, you saw. My name's there. Oh my god. Oh my god.
No, we didn't know. Daniel's welcome. Oh, there's that me.
Brother.
Oh, brother, there's his dad again. First, her mom wants to unpack her stuff.
Well, I think it was more interesting than fourth finger.
Well, I know what they're gonna say about the fourth finger. Use it.
Just use it or lose it.
So.
This is it.
Nothing.
So they think the climate is different now for young artists.
Yeah, like they're looking at some of the people who have gotten.
Now he's the associate conductor of the orchestra.
That's right.
You know him personally and other members of the orchestra for a number of years, right?
Yeah, David Allen Miller was promoted this month, and he'll be leading a regular subscription. And we hear another incredible prodigy, the 12-year-old Leila J right now, as soloist in the Violin Concerto No. 5 in A minor by the Belgian Henri Vieuxtemps, David Allen Miller, and the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Los Angeles? How did
She liked that dress. She wore it for the other one too, no?
Really?
Well, it's the same style. At least for the
She have a southern accent? When she talks so? Where should we go?
Who's got the outfits, right? I'm never on top of it. I'm always on I gotta get
The what? Okay.
Personally and other members of the orchestra for.
This is crazy. You have to make the recording. You go over it. What did you get? Okay, can you get to it?